Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sarah Dorr. I am the Director of Professional Development at the International Studies Association. Today, I'm here with Kay Gruder. Kay is the Associate Director of Graduate Student and Postdoc Career Services at the Center for Career Development at the University of Connecticut. And she's also the Career Liaison for International Student and Scholar Services. So today, Kay has graciously agreed to talk to us about preparation and tips for academic job interviews. This is part of ISA's academic career series. We have several other recordings available to help you in the academic job process. We have crafting a teaching philosophy statement, a diversity statement, and a few others, and I'll put the link in the chat for those. So today's event is going to be interactive. Kay will be asking you some questions at certain points throughout the webinar. You can respond in the chat and Q&A. You can also raise your hand and we can unmute you if that's preferable. So we'll start with Kay's presentation and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. So save any questions that do come up. All right, Kay, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm delighted to be here today. And as you mentioned, this session is preparation and tips for academic job interviews. And this is largely within the context of academic jobs in the US. And I understand that things might be very different in other parts of the world, but hopefully you're on today's session because you're curious about what's going on here. Presentation overview, we're going to talk quite a bit about preparation today because that is really the foundation. We'll talk a bit about the types of common interviews that we see with academic jobs. Navigating, we're going to look at an actual itinerary of a kind of day and a half, 2-day academic job interview. We're going to kind of deconstruct that a bit together. Think about some things to just have handy, a bit more preparation, and then the idea of the value of strategic thank you notes or emails. So that's what we're going to cover. And I'm going to move in here to the session. Academic interviews are really like an endurance marathon. And so I'm going to pop a question in chat here, which is really, how do people prepare for a marathon? Maybe we have some marathon runners in the group today. But how do people prepare? What steps or actions do they take? And I'd love to have your response in chat for that. So I'll just give you a minute to think about that. So I hear progressively more difficult training, which replicate aspects of the experience. Great. Start preparing months before. Eating a lot, yeah. Fueling one's body is definitely important. Sleep, food, breaks, these are great. Conditioning, love it, love it. So all of those contributions are excellent, and I'm not a marathon or an endurance marathon runner, but I can imagine that all of that is really quite important. Having an action plan, I see in there as well. So thank you so much for those contributions. So yeah, we'll see some of this reflected here too in this slide. Do some research. If I was going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to become a marathon runner, probably want to do a bit of research before I jump into that. There's training, there's practicing, there's having the right gear, right? Using my shoes that I have might not offer enough support, or I might decide to do it barefoot. I don't know. Maintaining optimum health is really important. Choosing a pace to work on whatever distance I'm working on. Consulting with others is really important, right? Those who've done these things before us can offer kind of great advice and often insights that we can't even begin to think about. And then taking some time to reflect and pause, like taking the breath. Okay, I've accomplished this piece, or, what went particularly well with today's training. But then it's really kind of iterative, right? We kind of do it again, get up, do it again, make some adjustments and so forth. So I just really like this idea and image that when you are engaged in academic interviews, it is very much like a marathon. You're often on site or doing a virtual interview for hours. And if you're on site, you're often on site at the institution interviewing for a day, day and a half, 2 days. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot intellectually, it takes a lot emotionally, it takes a lot physically. So that's really why I bring us to this point of thinking about it as a marathon and how we want to prepare. Common types of interviews within the US, virtual screening interviews are pretty common. Those could be about 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes in duration. Those are often with one or more individuals on that virtual screening interview. Virtual multi-hour interviews or multi-day virtual interviews. They're trying to really replicate some of what occurs with the on-site interview. We have interviews at an institution that are multi-day. Typically, if they're bringing you in, it's going to be a day and a half sort of scenario. And then there are interviews that occur at some of our academic conferences or professional meetings. And those tend to be more like the couple of hour long interview format. And often those are in person if the conference is in person. So these are just some of the more common types of interviews. Lots of tips to prepare. No shortage of tips. We cover tips now. We're going to come back to tips a little bit toward the end of the session. As I said, preparation is key. It's a foundation. When you feel prepared, you're going to be able to project the most confidence and focus. If you're not prepared and you're thinking about, oh, I should have this, I should have that, that distractive sort of thinking is going to likely surface in the kinds of conversations that you're having with people. So I put a lot into the preparation piece. Basically, you will receive an itinerary. And if you don't, sometimes institutions don't send an itinerary as a matter of course, but it is both smart, strategic to ask for one if one isn't provided. And you could say something as simple as, with a desire to prepare the best for my time with the committee and others that I'll be meeting with. I would really value having an itinerary of sort of what types of interviews I'll have and who some of the faculty or admins or leadership of the institution I would be meeting with. So trying to get actual names of people is really useful because then that can add to your research. You can look up some of the people that you would be meeting with just to have a feeling for kind of what they look like. Maybe look at their CV if it's online, see what kind of research they're doing, what seems to be important to them. And when you have that type of background information, when you meet somebody, it can be, it's just a little more familiar, right? It's not like, oh, let me try and figure this person out. Are they in the geology department? Or I can't remember. So that kind of familiarization with the people is really important. If you're asked to do a job talk or a research talk as part of the interview, definitely practice it. Here again, if you can find out who's going to be in the audience for that job talk or research talk, that's useful because maybe you need to adjust the level of technical language that you're using, or maybe you want to integrate some different examples. If you know that you're presenting to people in your specific field of study, you would handle that differently than if you knew it was a multidisciplinary audience and you think like, oh, maybe I could add an example that would resonate for faculty who are in political science or who are in philosophy. So trying to find out the nature of the audience is really good for that. Sometimes with academic interviews, you're asked to run through a class or demo a class. I see this coming up a lot of different ways with the students that I work with. Sometimes they're asked to do like a 20-minute demo on anything they want, any topic. Other times they're informed in the itinerary that they're going to be teaching in Dr. So-and-so's class. And right now that class is covering whatever the topic is, and to then come up with something that relates to that topic. So we see lots of variation in the models for some of this class demoing, teaching demo kind of experience that are integrated into these interviews. Again, if they haven't said, it's better to ask than to be caught off guard. In terms of your own interviewing, really think about curating examples that show how you can do the tasks identified in the job description. So if in the job posting, it says something like, you know, we're interested in individuals who can mentor our students in research. Well, if you've mentored students, you'll want to come up with a nice example of how you can talk about that. If you've mentored students in research, you'll want to extend your example to include that and more specifically match the job posting. Questions can get asked in all different ways. So a lot of times what I find is people focus a lot on practicing questions, but then when the questions change, all of a sudden, the person being interviewed gets kind of like out of kilter, right? Because they didn't expect that question. It's a better approach to have a sense of the kinds of questions that they'll ask. Questions about why this role, why this institution, what ways have you created more inclusive classrooms? It's much better to have a sense of like what they'll ask you than the exact questions that they'll ask. And it's more important to have examples that you can draw from no matter what the question is. So I encourage people to focus on curating examples and spending actually less time on rehearsing answers to questions. And the other piece here is to practice out loud. A lot of times people practice in their head. So as an example, if I were asked to speak Spanish, in my head, I can speak Spanish very well. But as soon as I have to speak out loud, kind of all falls apart a bit. And we find that this is true with interviewing. People rehearse answers in their head, feels pretty comfortable in there. But then when you're faced with having to talk about how great you are and hearing yourself out loud talk about how great you are, it can be a little jarring and it can be like, oh, did I actually just say that about myself? That feels really awkward and weird. But you're the only one who can tell the stories of your skills, your success, your knowledge, your training. And And interviews are out loud. So, I think we need to practice in the way that they occur. A lot of times that doesn't happen. So focus on curating examples, focus on sharing those examples out loud, and you'll be in a good place. Some additional tips, like I said, no shortage of tips. Determine what you're going to wear. And this is true whether you're sitting at your computer for the interview or if you're showing up to a location. There's been some research done that it's best if you're having an interview that's virtual, that you fully dress for the interview. Like, don't wear your casual workout pants, your marathon pants on the bottom, and then let's say a jacket or a blouse on top, but actually dress as if you were going to show up in person. And there's just something about that transition to that appropriate interview wear that also influences how one sort of conducts themselves. And then try to pack with carry-on, because for anyone who's traveling a lot or has traveled, that all sorts of things can happen with luggage. So having as much as you need right with you on your flight is often the best strategy there. Research everything you can about the department, the college, the university, the individuals. You've likely done a lot of that research already in applying for the position. In part, it could be why you were brought in for an interview, because you did such great research and were able to tie your application to the goals and priorities of the department and the university. Another area where I see individuals often kind of lacking is having some strategies that give you focus and energy or create calm. Early on in my career, I was doing some pretty significant presentation on stages with hundreds of people in an audience. And I found that a little bit nerve-wracking. And so what I did is I had a picture of my family that was, either on the clipboard or the lectern, kind of wherever I was kind of coming back to kind of talk. And I found that really focusing for me. It just kind of totally melted away any nervousness that I had. I've gone through interviews where I've put up a Post-it near my computer that has some sort of positive messaging to myself, like be bold, or use your brave voice, or whatever it might be. There are also some techniques, like if you physically feel shaky nervous, you can wiggle your big toe, not your whole foot. You don't want to go tap, 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 but wiggle your big toe. And wiggling your big toe while you're speaking actually directs energy there and takes a little of the energy out of your upper body, where it might be more visible that you're feeling a bit nervous. So do some research, ask friends, talk to people, and have a few strategies that you can lean into during different parts of your interview. Assembled materials that you want close at hand. I'm going to mention a bit more about that later. If you're traveling to a site, definitely view the local area and campus maps. It's really great to just say like, oh, okay, I know where that building is, or I recognize that statue in the center of the campus. Anything you can do to just become a little more familiar means that once you're there, you're processing a little less some of those things of like showing up in a new place, right? And then check out this another area where I see people kind of forget to prepare. Check out the local news, also be aware of national and international happenings. I had a situation where a student had gone to an interview, and it was after like a really bad storm, like a devastating storm for the area. And if they hadn't been aware of that, it would have been awkward, because during the department dinner, like some faculty got together with the candidate, they went out to dinner. It's still part of the interview, but it's a lot less formal, much more casual. And the conversation was all about the devastation of the big storm. And so they were at least able to empathize. They were at least able to, share what they heard. They were able to engage in that conversation that was very dominant during that more casual meeting time with people. So it is really useful to kind of get a handle of what might be going on in the particular area. And then when we have like major events, like soccer events, international events like that, you might find that in those more casual situations, some conversation comes up around those. I'm never going to be an expert in sports, but I'd at least want to know kind of what was going on in a geographic area, perhaps, just in case the conversation turned more casual, which it often does in those situations with like the dinners or the breakfasts together. So I know that was quite a bit. And I think if you think about those 11 tips, they're also aligned with some of the key themes that we had from the earlier slide in terms of preparation, right? It's kind of preparation yourself, the things around you, preparation about the people you're going to meet, and so forth. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next section here. It's interesting because with interviews, you have your first impressions and you have everything that happens in between, and then you have your last impression. And I was trained as a musician, and I remember my professor saying to me, it's really important how you start and how you end a piece. And like people may forget some of the stuff in between if you make a mistake. And I think that's true to some degree with interviews as well. This first, like bookends, first impression, last impression, really strong. Will there be things you wish you did differently in between? Possibly, certainly, and that's okay. All right, so my next question for you all is, here is an itinerary, slightly adapted from a real itinerary that a student had. And I'm just going to pause here and give you time to look at it. But I would like you to start putting in chat what some of your sort of observations are in looking at this, what you notice. I'm going to leave it pretty open. See some good stuff coming in there. Yes, intense. Yep, a lot of diversity about the departments that the faculty are drawn from. Very little time for breaks, yes, and especially if something runs over, very little time. No real time to rest. Feels a little less tight than one that someone had here. Lunch with students, curious about that. Great, good. Yeah, information missing, yeah. Open forum with faculty, yeah. Great, some good input too on why some of these sessions occur. Yeah, good stuff in the chat, thank you. All right, so I think most of us would agree that it seems pretty intense. This person is flying into Los Angeles, California. And the person picking them up is department admin. And, the interview begins immediately. So if after getting off the airplane, you need to kind of get yourself together, it would be fine to take a few minutes in the airport, certainly, to do that. I know sometimes people will do a slight change of clothes. They might wear something much more comfortable on the plane, but then they'll just adjust their attire a little bit. You don't have to be interview appropriate at that point, but they might just change out of maybe athletic wear into a more structured pant. So just something to keep in mind there. So the interview starts with Susan. And really the interview started way back, maybe you had a pre-screening interview, maybe you've been in touch with the department chair a few times with some questions. So really every interaction is part of the interview. Then on Tuesday, things get going pretty early. Pick up at the hotel with the department chair and breakfast with the department. Sometimes those breakfasts are more casual, but sometimes that is the time that the department goes around and asks questions. And it's just kind of hard to know if you don't see another time period in an itinerary where you would be with the whole department in a formal way, then you could probably lean towards the idea that at this breakfast, there'd be some more formal questions. It wouldn't just be sort of sitting around casually. Then we go out into these, short interviews with some of the faculty. This was a position that was more of a multidisciplinary kind of role. With those, the key throughout the day is really to make it feel that for everybody, this is the first interview for you in terms of your energy. You might find that after a day, 5 people have asked you, tell me about yourself or tell me about your research. And in your head, you're just like, oh, I can't answer this again. I can't remember what I said here or that. I just can't. But you have to bring that sort of first impression energy to every interview. And so again, thinking about what techniques can I use to get my energy up and my focus in for Janice or Giannis, and then similarly, what can I do to have an equally solid interview with Toma? And then we have the teaching demo. Yes, we don't know where the class is. It could be that someone walks us from one part of the interview to the next. That's often the case where there's somebody, either they do a transferal of you to the next person. But if it seems really unclear that that's not happening, you could definitely also ask about the class number or building and so forth. And then you're back with the department chair, and then lunch with students. Lunch with students can be really key in that it's a great time to get the students talking. Ask them about what they're enjoying about their major, or if they're doing research, their research. Also, ask them if there are suggestions that they have for someone new or for the department, and help them to see that you could also be an advocate for them. So the lunch, they may have specific questions, but it also might be pretty casual. And I'm of the opinion that if you can get them talking about themselves and what they're excited about and ideas they have for change, that's a pretty successful lunch with students. Then there's the research talk or the job talk. then meeting with the dean. Now, it's also important to be really aware of who you're meeting with and then the kind of questions you have for them, because pretty much every interview will end with something like, oh, do you have any questions for me? Or do you have any questions for us? And this is an example where maybe the dean of the college, you're going to ask questions that are more overarching. Maybe it's about what are some of the priorities, or where do you see the department of so-and-so fitting into the priorities? So it's that higher level, 30,000 foot leadership directed kind of question. Where with the faculty, you could ask more about the day-to-day. So tell me a little bit about how geography and political science collaborate on teaching, or whatever it might be. It could be much more about the day-to-day. And then with someone like the department chair, it can be a little bit about the day-to-day, but much more about the department, like where they see the department going. Are there areas within the department that could benefit from additional this or that? What seems to be going particularly well? So not quite the same high level types of questions as with the dean, but also not in the day-to-day as much as with the faculty that would be colleagues. Open forum with faculty, that can be done virtually. That can also be that you're brought into a large room and there are dozens of faculty ready to meet you. And with that, it's always great to take an active role. Sometimes you might find that you're standing and stationed next to the department chair, and it's almost like a receiving line where people come in and they greet you and you greet them, and it's a chance for you maybe to ask a question about them. Or it might be more of a mingling kind of event where there's desserts or coffee, tea kinds of things set up, and you kind of need to make your way through and start talking to people. I encourage individuals to look for these mingling kinds of opportunities, whether it's at their academic conference or at an event on their at their institution, to just kind of continuously feel uncomfortable if this is a space that you feel uncomfortable with, and just work on growing your level of comfort. Some people, no problem, go in, shake hands, talk, chat, this, that. But for many people, it can be a little overwhelming to just be sort of showing up in a room with a lot of people you don't know. Then you're back to the hotel for, it looks like about an hour. And then it's out to dinner with the department. Here, two questions I often get are, what should I order? And if people do drink alcohol, the question is, should I also drink alcohol? And so for dinner or any meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, any meal, I always encourage people to really think about something easy to eat, like something that's not too messy or unfamiliar. And you're like, oh, I don't know if I should cut this way, or do I remove this and then eat, pick something that, again, the idea is to not have your brain be worried about stuff. It's to have your brain free so that you can focus on the things you need to focus on. So that's my advice about the food, like what to order. Simple, something that's easy for you to eat. And then in terms of alcohol, I think it's a really personal experience. If you're someone who does drink alcohol, and then members of the department drink alcohol, it's a very personal decision whether you do or don't. You know, if you feel that by doing it, you're going to be less optimal as a candidate in terms of like your acuity to engage, answer questions, things like that, then you might say, you know, if I was at home with my friends, I'd have a drink. But in this case, I'm not going to have a drink. So that's what I mean by a personal decision. And if you don't drink, then of course you would not drink. And then on Wednesday, there's a campus tour that might be with a student. A lot of times you'll meet with HR, with human resources, the department that's often navigating things like an offer, a job offer, insurance. They'll often talk about how great the institution is and all that it has to offer. So within the US context, that's human resources is that office. And then sometimes there's this wrap up with the department chair. It might be the department chair saying, hey, what have you learned about us in your time with us? Or do you have any questions? So it's usually this kind of just summary kind of meeting with the department chair. So I'm going to pause here and just see if we have questions about the itinerary.
Yeah, I see 2 in the chat now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the navigating if others are drinking might feel awkward is what I'm getting from this. So something like awkwardness is often an emotion that we personally bring to a situation. Like the person drinking may not really be caring or thinking about whether you have a seltzer water, like non-alcoholic, or ice water, or some sort of carbonated beverage, like non-alcoholic beverage. So I just encourage people to really kind of think about awkwardness and what that is and where it comes from. A lot of times it's sort of self-induced. Like if we all showed up in a room together and some people were drinking and some people weren't, I don't think people would be looking at Kay Gruder and saying, oh, Kay Gruder looks like she only has a cranberry juice, or like, I really don't think so, but I might feel awkward. But like, that's my thing. I gotta work on that, right? So that's just, oh, so if they say like, why aren't you drinking? Tell them why you aren't drinking. You can decide how transparent you want to be. I mean, I think if it's a deal breaker for you, you could probably be pretty transparent. If you want to mention something about, you know, I know that I have another big day of interviews tomorrow. I know my body just works better if I don't drink. I'm really enjoying my time. I found that when I'm in interviews and preparing, it's kind of like running a marathon, and I do much better when I don't drink. So, you know, anything like that would be fine. If it's for religious reasons, it would be a personal choice whether to divulge that or not. Really personal choice. You know, it could be health reasons, anything. So it's it can be tricky. Like, I hear you on that. It can be tricky. It can feel awkward. And I think everyone kind of has to find their way to navigate it in either like a personal reason, optimal health reason, whatever they choose to share. Tips for an internal candidate. I'll come back to that because I'm not sure. I'll come back to that. So just kind of tag that one, Sarah, if you can.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to move through some of these other slides. So knowing your audience, right? We talked about that. And and just recognizing that everybody's part of the interview. When we conduct interviews here, people come up to our reception desk, they greet the person, and we will ask the people at our reception desk, if we have students covering our desk, if we have professional staff covering our desk, we'll ask them, what was your encounter like with candidate A? What was your encounter like with candidate B? So everybody is part of it. Questions for administrators, questions for the dean, department chair, faculty, and students. I kind of covered some of those examples. And then there are some items that you'll want to have readily available. Certainly copies of your CV or any other documents. If you're on site at an institution, personal care items can be really important because you won't be back to your hotel for many hours. So if for you, you know that you like to freshen up and brush your teeth, or, you know, put a comb through your hair, or, you know, whatever it is, just have whatever you need in terms of personal care items. Could be like medicines. You know, somebody's prone to migraines, and the migraines are part of sort of a stress cycle. Well, this could be pretty stressful, flying to LA and going through 2 days of interviews. And so maybe they want to have their migraine medicine with them, right? Writing implement might sound silly, but there are many times where people are like searching for a pen. So you can be that person that has the pen. Snacks that provide energy. We talked about snacks and fueling our bodies for the marathon. So something that you can just grab in between in those little 10, 5, 15-minute time periods that you know can fuel you. And it's going to be different for everyone. Certainly have your technology with you, but turned off. And then you can take notes. This is another question I get a lot. You know, it's like, well, can I be writing down things? Well, you can, but you don't want to be transcribing like entire conversations. But it is really very strategically sound to just like have a page, meeting with department chair, 11 o'clock Wednesday, and then just write some key bullet point types of notes. And this may inform the kinds of questions you ask as well. So not note taking to the point that it's a distraction, but some note taking so that you can, you know, connect back to things that people said, or you can build bridges between things that people said. Very, very appropriate. Business cards. I know sometimes people just use electronic business cards, but in most social situations within the US context, people still use a printed business card. So you might consider having that. And then water, usually you're provided water, but if you know that you prefer a brand of bottled water, you might have a small bottle. Don't come in with like a gallon jug, be a little more subtle than that, but having some sort of hydration is key as well. So really the personal care items and that idea that you can take notes in a notebook, Padfolio, something like that, are pretty important. And then a bit more preparation. Take notes when you have a few minutes. At the end of the day, you can take notes. Between interviews, you can take notes just to kind of keep everything organized in your mind, because it's kind of like buying a car or looking at apartments or houses. It all starts to blend in together. So taking some notes, good strategy. If you know where you're going to be eating, sometimes an itinerary will actually say dinner at the so-and-so cafe. And then you could go online beforehand and look at the menu. Maybe you have you know, dietary needs or style of eating, or any number of things that could direct kind of what you would choose in a restaurant situation. So if I'm a vegan and I'm going to a place and I'm like, no, I'm not so sure that at the steakhouse we're going to have some good vegan options, but I could at least go to the menu and kind of prepare for what that might look like for me. And then if you're serious about the area, like you're like, wow, I could visualize myself in the state of Iowa and in a particular city, then you could certainly also consider connecting with a realtor just to get a sense of the housing and rental market in that location. So that's like a different kind of preparation. It's sort of preparing a little bit for what might be next. And then after the interview, you'll want to be pretty intentional with your thank yous. These can be typically emails. Used to be a few years ago, we would encourage people to send a card and an email, but pretty much we've now moved to 100%, at least within the US context, 100% email thank yous. Think about the interviews and use the thank you note as really a strategic note. So if you felt particularly well aligned with aspects of the position, you could put that in the thank you note. Could be something like, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. When the committee was talking about the importance of mentoring undergraduate researches, this resonated with me as I have always blah, 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 right? So you're reinforcing the ways that you're aligned with the position. And then also, personally, I've successfully used a thank you note to kind of pick up the pieces of something I didn't do so well. I remember being in a boardroom with about 20 people around the board table, and the vice provost asked me a question and kind of threw me. And it was something I honestly hadn't really thought about. And so I just said, like, oh, in this moment, this is how I'd answer the question. I said, but I really would like to think a bit more about this. So I wrote a thank you note that at that point in time, it was writing and emailing, but I wrote a thank you note to the vice provost, and I indicated like a stronger answer, which I thought of on my drive home. Of course, you know, hindsight, it's always great. But you can use the thank you note as a way to add something you forgot to mention, or to clarify an answer to a question. And that can also really make a strong last impression. So we had first impression, everything that happens in between, and then this strong strategic last impression. So with that, I'd be delighted to answer some questions.
Thank you, Kay.
You're welcome.
So I know we wanted to circle back to the question about tips or advice for an internal candidate.
Yes, so I would like that person just to share a little bit more. Is that with regard to the kinds of questions that they would ask people that they already know if they're an internal candidate? Is it around that? So let's see where the question is here. So it's Shelley. Shelley, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
And Shelley, if you're comfortable speaking, I can unmute you. You would just need to raise your hand, I think. Oh, the hand is raised. Okay, you should be good to go.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this presentation. I was asking about what questions I should ask as an internal candidate. I think that would be really great. But then anything else off the top of your head that you might have, like any advice or tips for an internal candidate, because it is a little bit different since you already know the institution and you know the colleagues.
Yep, definitely. And it will be different for them too, I think, in the way that, they ask you questions and things. One piece of advice that I have is that sometimes people assume that they know us, or they know the depths of our experiences and our skills and our knowledge and training. And so on the surface, all those people that you know at the institution that you're already at might be feeling like, yeah, we know Shelley. Shelley's great. Shelley can do A and B and C. And that's wonderful. And I would also encourage you to really be intentional and aware about sharing sort of the depths and breadth of who you are. So you aren't sort of the internal candidate on the surface, but you actually become a more significant candidate because you're sharing more. And also with internal candidates, you can share a little bit more about like the journey or how you've grown or how you've developed or what's contributed to your development, whether it's as a researcher or as a faculty member. And I think being able to show the ways that you are a learner in the environment and how that's propelled you forward in like successful ways, that can be really useful too. So those are two just kind of general comments. And then in terms of the questions you ask people, yeah, that's going to definitely be different if you know them. But again, knowing somebody, you might know them, but maybe there is a authentic question that you want to ask, or maybe there's some changes within the department or the curriculum or things where you could say, Kay, I know we're in the department, but I don't think I've had a chance to hear about your thoughts on the new curriculum revisions. So I still think there are ways that you can ask appropriate questions. It's just not going to be sort of as textbook, right? As, oh, ask this kind of question for this person. Does that help, Shelley? Great. Happy.
Okay, so we have a question on that asks, is it common to have an interview day alone or to be with other candidates?
Yeah.
Do I meet my competition?
Yeah. Oh, so talk about it could be awkward. So this is from, like stories that students have shared. And even in my own office, when we're hiring, sometimes we're kind of ushering out one candidate and ushering in the next, and you're like, oh, I hope everybody's on time. So that can be awkward for sure. There was a student, this was right before, it would have been, I guess, sort of the job cycle in 2019. They were at the same hotel having breakfast and like started talking to this other person at breakfast. They were eating breakfast solo at the hotel and started talking to them, found out that they were also being interviewed. And, they just kind of they actually bonded and recognized that ultimately the institution is going to pick the best person to meet the needs of the position, and that they were both coming in sort of with a slightly different background and skill set. And like some of that's just totally out of one's control. Like we are who we are, we present what we have. And, if that's what the institution is looking for, great. But, we're both equally good candidates kind of thing. So awkward. I'm not aware of what we would call like a group interview process happening. I've been doing this work for about 8 years. And within academic jobs, I'm not aware of where like all the candidates are brought in and they're sitting in a panel and, people in the audience are asking them the question. I have not had students provide feedback that they've ever had that model. In industry, yes. But I haven't seen that in academia. Now, I'll just share for any of the University of Connecticut folks that are on or in this session. if you haven't worked with me, please know that I'm here to work with you on all aspects of your career preparation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kay. I learned a lot. I especially liked your tip to use the thank you note to follow up on something that you thought you could have done better. And I think that's an unusual one, but it really makes sense. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you everybody
Thank you
for attending today. All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.